Hi, and welcome to StackStorm 101. Today we're going to go over the basics of using StackStorm with its command line interface. The command to access StackStorm is st2. You'll see here that we are running version 0.5.1. The st2 command does come pre-installed with every version of StackStorm, so you will have access to this from the command line. If we take a look at the help for st2, you can see the various positional arguments are really the components of StackStorm that you have access to from this tool. So you can manipulate your rules, triggers, sensors, actions. You can run an action or even get access to your execution history from this tool. So if we take a look at the actions in a particular pack, the core pack comes out of the box pre-installed to give you some actions that you can use right away. We give you the ability to run arbitrary Linux commands both locally and remotely with and without elevated privileges, as well as the ability to make an HTTP call. There's an interface to send mail, as well as an interface to our fork of Hubot, which we call StormBot. If we take a look at the list of triggers, these triggers are generated by the built-in sensors. The two built-in sensors are a timer sensor and a webhook sensor. The timer sensor gives you the ability to fire actions based off of a given interval at a specific date or using the familiar cron format. The webhook sensor allows you to post to a generic webhook endpoint or to specify a webhook endpoint that you want to post to within the rule. I've preloaded a couple rules in here just to show you what the rule list would look like, but out of the box we do not load any rules, and that's by design. Every infrastructure is different, so your rules are going to be slightly different, but we do provide you with samples for those. Let's go ahead and try running a command. The syntax to run a command is the pack name dot and then the action name. So you can see here I'm running the local command from the core pack, which will just execute an arbitrary Linux command. And the command I'm going to execute is date, so I pass that in as a positional parameter. You'll see that it gives me back all of the context that I had for that particular action execution, including the name of the action, the parameters I gave it, and things like that, as well as all of the output from that action. If I take a look at the execution list, I can actually go back and get that action at any point via the ID. If I do an st2 execution get, and there's the output from that same action that I just ran. We can also run against remote hosts. So let's try using the remote action. For this, I'll need to pass in a list of hosts. And then once again, the positional argument is just the Linux command I'll be running. And here we see the output from that command. You'll see that it breaks it down by host and then gives me the same output fields for each one of those hosts. Now let's take a look at all the actions that I have loaded in this system. So you'll see that on top of the core actions, there's also another set of actions called packs. Packs come pre-installed also, and they're used specifically for manipulation of packs. They allow you to install and uninstall integration packs from our community website quite easily. The other thing that I have on this system is that I've preloaded some workflow simulations, and I also have some generic actions that I tend to use. Down there at the bottom you see the st2 generic. Each action has its own metadata, so if I was to go and want to run the HTTP action and I forgot what the parameters were for that action, I could actually put -h at the end and I could get the help for that action. So So you'll see here that the only required parameter for the HTTP action is URL. All these other parameters are optional. So let's go ahead and run that action. With any action that I run, I can also pass in a -a. This will run the action asynchronously, so it runs it in the background. So you'll see that the status on this action actually tells me that it's scheduled. And if I want to go retrieve the execution of that status, I can do this. So that is all of everything that was curled off of the Google homepage. So now let's go ahead and create a rule for around a webhook, and let's try getting that rule to fire. So you'll see there's some JSON files in here. Most of these I've already loaded into the system. The one that we're going to be doing now is the sample rule with webhooks. So let's take a look at it. Rules are fairly easy to define. You give them a name, a description. You say what trigger they're based off of, or what trigger is going to fire them. And then you can put the criteria fields in. So for the criteria says for this trigger, within the body of this trigger, if there's a field named name and it equals st2, then fire this action. And the action is a local action to echo out the entire body of the trigger to this particular file. So let's go ahead and add this rule into the system. And you'll see that's the output for the rule, or that's the output for the rule creation. If we go look at a rule list, it now shows up here. And if at any point we want to retrieve that rule, we can do an st2 rule get, and that's all of that same information that was in that JSON file. If we prefer that in JSON format, we can do it with the -j. And that looks very similar to the file that we loaded in the first place. So now let's go ahead and try and get that rule to fire. I actually have a curl statement here that I have pre-written so that I don't fat finger it. We'll go ahead and paste this onto the command line here, and what I'm doing is I'm curling against that webhook endpoint that was defined up here, sample. So generic sample, and then I'm passing in a JSON body to that has the name equals st2. So that should match against this rule. So now if we go look at the execution list, we should see the last execution that happened there it is. The last execution that happened was fired by that particular rule because it matched the criteria, and then it went ahead and it echoed out this payload body out to this file. So now we can actually look at this file. And we can see that's the same JSON that I had passed into the webhook. So we could, in theory, have any particular program posting this data into this webhook and have rules matching against it, like monitoring systems or build systems or anything like that. So I think that just about wraps up our StackStorm 101. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy the system.